All right, welcome to Halitics on Wednesday. Vernon, I always have trouble remembering what date I am, what date it is, what day it is. I get it wrong all the time. I have to fumble, so I'm pretty proud of myself. The show's starting off well. I remembered your name, and I remembered the day of the week. It's Wednesday. I have no idea what date it is, though. Vernon Bohr, Jr., Santa Cruz County Media Personality. Do you like that title? We were debating what I should call you.
That's fine. That's perfect.
You know, you're using a professional mic, and I've had several other guests on, and as soon as I heard you, well, first of all, you've got that mellifluous radio voice, which is causing me to affect a slightly deeper voice than my usual high tenor quasi falsetto. So thank you for that.
Do you want me to go to my webcam mic?
No, you sound good. Are you not using your web? It sounds like a pro mic.
It's supposed to be a good one.
No, that's what I'm saying. You sound really good. Maybe I should have you use a cheap quality mic so I'll sound a little better by comparison.
Well,
So you've always been good to me and had me on your show, and we were talking about this. Let's get into the media differential a little bit, or the changes we've seen over time. Radio really big, even when I was a kid, when you were a kid. I know you actually served our nation in Vietnam, so I thank you for the service, even though I certainly have questions about the wisdom of that war. But at that time, radio, would you call it king, or was TV by then already the number one media?
well, when I started doing radio, cable TV, Fox News, and all those were starting to come in early '90s, and I started. What got me into radio is I always used to listen to music. And then I turned in our local radio station one day. I'll never forget, it was the '88 election. And they talked about term limits passing in Santa Cruz. And from there, I went from listening to music to talk radio, became a regular caller and annoying everybody probably. But the host then started asking me if I could fill in. Okay. And slowly but surely, I started doing it more regularly and had regular shows over the years and everything like that. So that's how I got into it, early '90s.
So I love radio, Vernon. I mean, I loved when I was doing it in Monterey. I don't remember you back then when I was doing it. I know you were in the area, but I guess you were, you know, you didn't really call me when I was on the air, and I don't remember you calling our program. You seem to prefer, as I glean, more conservative media in general, but you're always up for a great disagreement debate. So I wanted to have you on, and again, because you've been good to me in the past by having me on your program, so I thought you could do me another solid and come on here and make this program a little better than it's been.
Hal, for years, I would bounce back and forth between MSNBC and Fox News because I figured that you really need to listen to everything and every point of view. And I still try and do that. I've listened. I'm not listening to many politics these days, and I'll tell you why. You know, it's your world, your battle to fight. You're a couple years younger than me. And it's not that my opinions don't matter, but they matter less. It's time for the younger people in the world to take over. People in Congress, the presidency, in fact, too old. I don't care whether it's Biden or Trump, too old. Yeah, really, they don't serve the needs of the up and coming youth of our nation, young adults. And you know, they always show pictures of us when we're young, and I recently saw a recent picture of Feinstein and thought,
oh my gosh, yeah. Well, she's close to 90, so and you know, people say in defense of Biden being in his 80s, or Bernie or Trump getting now into his late 70s, his age is just a number, and we shouldn't be ageist, quote. But you know, look, I'm not sure if you're that old, if you're an octogenarian, but my mother is, my mother-in-law is, and their attitude is, yeah, it's just a number, but it's an important number, right? I mean, it's relevant. And look, I do think if I look at Trump and Bernie right now and putting aside all my political views of those individuals and Biden, it seems pretty clear Biden's well past his prime compared to the other two. But you never know, right, when that dementia can set in, or the Alzheimer's, or you just lose also physically, which is really important as well. So I think by your mid 60s, you're already, I mean, that's why we have Social Security by your mid 60s. And these folks are well past that. And I'm getting close to that age too. Now, I believe I could serve, certainly emotionally, physically and mentally at this point, yes. But, how much longer, I don't know. I'm with you. I think they're too old. And I think most Americans feel the same way. We're not getting the candidates we want, Vernon. Poll after poll shows that. These are not the two people that most Americans want to run for president.
I listen to, they're a conservative young tube, the Matt and Blonde show on Sundays. They do a YouTube podcast. They're kind of about 250,000-60,000 listeners and everything.
Wow! I wish I could send some to my way, huh?
And I'll tell you why. Now, I think that Biden's showing signs of dementia. That's one of the major problems. Bernie's still pretty sharp, so I would give him that. But what they had play a clip at the beginning that always cracks me up when Bernie says, "Now go to the YouTube."
Well, you looked at the YouTube, and that's something you've decided not to embrace, right, Vernon? You're still, and I don't even quite know how you do your show, because are you on, what is it, the 1080 AM there in Santa Cruz?
No. They closed out the station. Michael pretty much let everyone go.
Oh, wow. Is there anything, are they broadcasting on that signal?
They are, but I don't know what they're broadcasting. I don't listen too much. I did internet radio from 2011 to 2014 when my wife broke her hip. And that was an interesting thing. I did like 10 hours a week, 12 hours a week. And they were late night shows, Saturday and Sunday, which I named the Psycho Corral because I brought out all the crazies. And I've always thought that this venue would be great, because it's like a big dinner table where we can discuss ideas, but I'm not so sure anymore, because one of the things that's happened with the internet is everyone's become an expert on everything, and everyone's very selective in what they pick. And my interests have moved on quite a bit from politics to the essence of what makes us work and pushes our biases. And the other problem with it is everyone's talking about the same thing. Everyone.
Yeah. No, it's true.
It's like a feeding frenzy, and so it's not even creative, and everyone tends to have the same guess. I was just a fluke. I posted something on Facebook, which was taken over by the old people from the young people, was virtually made for the young people.
Or we became old, right? Although I was never young when I used Facebook, but we become older and older. And that's even true, I think, for YouTube. Now it's more the TikTok, right? And those little shorts that you see on, I guess, Instagram and Snapchat. Instagram, just the images, I guess, no video. But you're right. I mean, even the YouTube now is becoming the old person's home, if you will. When I got into radio, my attitude was, I could produce something, and I think I made I think in retrospect it was a big mistake, but I thought, well, the advantage of radio is you do have kind of a built-in audience, you're local, whereas I'm just a tiny fish in an enormous Pacific Ocean right now. I mean, there's probably over 1 billion YouTube channels, I think they've estimated, certainly over 1 billion YouTube accounts, right? So anyone with an account can have a channel, and to break through is very, very challenging, but I don't really see another option. And here's where I see, and you and I discussed this, and you know me pretty well, so you can respond. You felt differently about yourself, I don't know fairly, that I think I do provide a different perspective than I've seen from anyone else on YouTube. And I've there's some hosts I really enjoy. Like I used to enjoy more Jimmy Dore. I don't know if you followed him. I think he's gone from trying to be a truth teller, which is what I try to do, tell what I believe is true to people who a lot of times don't want to hear it and get very angry when I present it, to someone who now is more pandering to his audience. I think you're the same way as I am, in a way that you're a provocateur. You like to ask questions that will make people uncomfortable. I like to give the answers that will make people uncomfortable.
I don't like to ask the questions that make people uncomfortable per se.
Well, you do, whether you like it or not. That's what you do.
One of the places we've gotten in this society, in my opinion, is tolerance has gone out the window. And I'm not saying you need to accept or agree with people. You're originally trained as an attorney, and one of the things that people hate about attorneys, but it's very practical, is the battleground is the courtroom. And that's where you fight out your ideas. And never the twain outside of the courtroom, people can't understand that. You got, attorneys can get along. Now, I'm sure, like with all human interactions, you like some people more than you do others, and you don't like, all that stuff goes on. But, I grew up through a time where you could passionately, disagree, but we've gotten to the point that I know people, you just mentioned Trump's name, and it's this. What I would say, you said would I consider myself conservative or where I stand? I would say I'm the Hal Ginsberg of the right, if you want to put it that way, because you take a lot of heat. You consider yourself to be a progressive or Democrat or leftist or whatever.
Not so much a Democrat. I mean, I'm more getting to almost be a green. And when you mentioned Fox and MSNBC, I'm like, oh my gosh, are those our two alt options? Because I've become as, perhaps, let me say it this way. Honestly, before Carlson was fired, I would have said I might find Fox less loathsome than MSNBC, because I would say that Tucker Carlson is a better host who provides more options for learning, something that we aren't normally going to hear, and doesn't provide received wisdom or just pander to an audience, which I think is unlike every host on MSNBC, at least that I'm aware of. I don't think they ever challenge their viewers. And Fox now doesn't either. I mean, everything on Hannity's show is designed to present a corporate right Republican view.
Yeah, I haven't watched Hannity in years. I watched in the beginning when it was Hannity and Combs, and Alan Combs and Hannity would go back and forth, and you'd have both sides, at least both sides kind of represented, even though they might be biased for their side. But I don't want, the only time I watch Hannity, if was a spillover that it followed after Tucker or something, I had to turn the television off, and they're repetitive bots in human form.
Well, Fox, I think, shot itself in the foot, really. I think this was a big mistake, what they did with Carlson. And he was a lightning rod. People on the left would say he was the worst host. He was the most horrible person on TV. And I was like astounded, really. I mean, you compared to Hannity, if you're a hard left or a progressive, there was a lot in Carlson, the pro-peace perspective that he presented, the populist perspective that he presented, the anti-corporate perspective that he presented. You get none of that on Hannity. I don't know how you could. I think what they objected to from Carlson is that he was a, self-described Republican, conservative anyway, on Fox, who was popular and who was kind of taking some of who was criticizing sometimes Democrats from the left even.
Well, and the thing that a lot of people don't realize about Carlson is he had Tucker Carlson today. I signed up for Fox Nation over a year ago because it was a year free for veterans, and it's pretty cheap. And the only thing I really watched on there for the most part was Tucker Carlson and Tucker Carlson Today. his interviews, I mean, he interviewed everybody. I don't know if you ever watched any of his
Yes,
interviews,
I didn't watch that, but I've seen him on YouTube. I never watch Fox. I don't watch those cable news stations, except I'll plead guilty. I do watch CNN on election night because I think they had the best election night coverage. John King, I always like him in that front of that board. But go ahead, I interrupted you. So you were saying about his interviewing.
No, I mean, the number of people he interviews across the board on all sorts of stuff, and excellent interviewer. Excellent interviewer, and his interactions. Love the Mike Tyson interview, a 2-hour interview with Killer Tyson. I mean, just all over the place. Brett Weinstein. I mean, unbridled, and I would say they shot themselves in the foot. Except maybe they know what most politicians, excuse me, know is memories are short.
Right, and their ultimate goal, just like MSNBC's, is not to challenge their corporate backers, right? Their owners, the ownership class, their advertisers, just like CNN. And I don't want to get into a debate about the climate cataclysm, as I call it now, but you will rarely hear it discussed on MSNBC or CNN because they get a lot of contributions, funding, whatever you want to call it, from fossil fuel extractors. But again, I don't want to get into that discussion, maybe in a little bit.
Except for one thing.
Yeah, you'll agree with that, what I just said.
No, yeah. The invitation to be on the show came right after I posted.
Oh, right. Well, we did debate, right? And I didn't show that chart. That was an interesting chart. I thought about getting into a disagreement about it. I know. But there's only so much time, and I just, it kind of slipped my mind as my other plea.
Let's jump into the debt ceiling.
Let's do that real quick. You're watching Halitics.
Oh, by the way, you
click subscribe. So I need to get to 100 subscribers. I was at 96, Vernon. Somebody unsubscribed. So that's it's so little, but yet for me, getting to 100 would be a nice little milestone.
It's a milestone. You were talking about my politics. I live in Santa Cruz, which is very liberal, and I was actually invited on the local television show years ago to debate on the side in favor of the death penalty. Okay, what I want you to know about that is I have a lot of problems with the death penalty. I think it's the ultimate statement of the failure of a society, but I also believe what Mill says, unless you can argue both sides of an issue, is thoroughly and eloquently is the people that believe one side or the other do. You don't really know the issue.
Well, I'll dispute that a little bit, Vernon, because I think some of us are just more articulate and eloquent than others. And I mean, John, if you're referring to, I assume John Stuart Mill, obviously, who's more, no one's more articulate than he is. He it's kind of a I don't want to say self beneficial statement or self-serving, because he could argue probably any position about as well as anybody else. So he's like, oh, I get to argue and you don't. And so that's where I would have a little bit of a disagreement, if that makes sense.
I'm not going to argue with God.
I don't know. Is that because I've got the mic? Is that the theory? If you have the mic, you're God. So all right,
you should go ahead.
We may not disagree as much about this. I am not a big believer, unlike maybe some liberals. I'm not a big believer in government spending more than it has, or in deficit spending. I think there are times it makes sense. I agree with John, and I'm just giving my position, and I invite you to provide yours in a moment. I agree with John Maynard Keynes that when there is a depression, when there is a failure of spending internally, that is a time when deficit spending absolutely makes sense. It can be a stimulus, but it shouldn't be something that goes on for however many years now. We've been steadily increasing the government debt, which is 40 years. In flush times, the Bible even says it. When you have the 7 years of good rain and good harvest, you save some of it. You put it aside for the rainy day, for the drought. Well, in that case, the drought day. So that's what I think we should have been doing. Even now, yes, there's great inequality, but we're not in a recession by any means. Corporations are making huge profits. Employment is up. Let's run a surplus at this time by raising taxes on those who can afford it. And when we do have that recession or depression, we can stave it off with the spending of the surplus. We're not doing that. I think it's very reckless, very irresponsible of both the Democrats and the Republicans to be consistently spending, as I understand it now, 25% more than we're taking in. Okay, I made my long speech. You go.
No, listen, the problem for me is the framing of the discussion. Okay, is the Democrats want to say that the Republicans want to ruin our credit by not raising the debt ceiling. The Republicans are trying to say, my understanding, because I haven't followed it a whole bunch, is yeah, we need to raise the debt ceiling, but we also need to put the binders on some of the spending to go along with that. And this is one of the things we ran into in the Reagan years, as you remember, is Reagan signed TEFRA, which was a tax equity relief act or something like that. And the deal is that he approved new spending for cuts in along the way. The cuts never happened. The spending did.
To be fair, though, and we can argue this, I mean, Reagan put us in this bind, not that the Democrats didn't let him do it, but Reagan and the Republicans, by this massive tax cut from 70% at the top to 28%, was a huge driver. And there's others too, which we can get it. I would certainly say the offshoring, the quote free trade deals have been devastating for our budgets.
Add to your reading list, if you will. America Went Right. I'll send you the link, because I know how you see that in what you believe about that. And I'm not saying that Reagan was great, but I've got CBO charts and stuff over the years, and they do all sorts of machinations with the budget, and everyone thinks they're an expert at it. I'm not saying I am, but what I do know is revenue receipts increased during the Reagan years, in spite of the tax cuts. As you also know, is the tax rates versus the what people actually pay, is different. I mean, so you had 90% tax rates, but the tax receipts, there were a lot of deductions during those years too. So I'm not going to.
Well, I that's probably true, although I think it was 70%. It had been over 90 under Kennedy. So JFK actually was the first one to bring the rates down from the heights of the Depression. And then Reagan really slashed them. And I don't disagree. Very few people paid those top rates because for two reasons. One, they were set at a high level, so you had to be above a certain income level to pay anything, to pay that on the margin. And the other was that there were alternative. There were tax breaks.
You could write off your credit card write-offs in those days.
But those also. That? I didn't have credit card interest at that time. I did not become 18 until Reagan was president.
But that credit card interest was deductible in those days.
Yeah, I believe it. But maybe I don't know. I don't want to get, the finer points I'm going to dodge a little bit here, Vernon.
That's okay.
But I'll say that I think there was one advantage to those high marginal rates beyond receipts was most people who had the opportunity to make that kind of money would defer income. So we didn't have as much massive inequality. If you were Jeff Bezos in 1975, you wouldn't have paid yourself, you wouldn't have put yourself in a position to make many, many billions of dollars in 1 year because you'd have to pay most of it back to the government. And that meant we had less inequality to the extent we do today. Also, Reagan did raise taxes on the middle class, which is something that people forget.
Okay.
And I don't think that's okay. I mean, to me, that was bad. I wish he hadn't.
Let's move into something.
All right. So the debt ceiling.
I don't.
You're saying you don't. You're saying it's okay for me to point out he raised taxes, or you're okay. Yeah. Not that it was okay for him to do it. I don't want to make your point. I don't want to make, put you in I don't want to misrepresent your view, is what I'm doing.
40, what close to 50% of the people don't pay taxes at all, which, I understand. So, and if you don't have money, you can't pay taxes. So the tax burden really, for the most part, falls on the rich in the first place. And I'm not rich like that. I'm warm, comfortable in my seat. And, if you, in the Bezos, the whole thing about corporations is fundamentally, they got a lot of ways around it, but their profits go back to the shareholders. So that's the average person that invests in them, or so it's a very complicated issue, and it's easy. This is my conclusion, Hal.
All right.
Is always got to be a bad guy.
I would
and the rich are
I usually try to pick out individuals because I'm not necessarily a big believer in high corporate tax rates. I accept the arguments, two arguments. One, that you have double taxation because you tax the corporate profits and then you tax it again when it goes to the investors. So that's one issue. I accept that. Now, the Bezos salary isn't, because the salary, it doesn't go to the corporate bottom line, so it's not taxed.
But all of the wealth of all the billionaires down to the 500,000 millionaires, if you want to go down to the 10,000 millionaires and stuff, and it puts a small dent when you're talking about trillions.
I think that isn't really accurate, because for one thing, Bezos has almost $200 trillion, as does Musk. So right there, you're close to $500 billion. But and also lots of middle class people do pay taxes. My son's a reporter. 1/3 of his income is withheld, and he's a low paid. But his income barely puts him in the middle class, actually. As you can imagine, he's a reporter, right? So they don't make anything, unfortunately. But it's the labor of love. Now, he's in a lucky, fortunate, he's privileged because he's my son, and he's from a family that, can afford it. But
he's privileged to have you for a dad.
He's lucky. That's luck. I don't know if it's good luck, but it's luck of a kind. Anyway, he writes for the Daily Caller, the conservative outlet there. So we've got Vernon, and I asked him to invite him to be on this program. He had no interest, zero. And I was like, come on, you're my son. You got to come on. He's like, so great to have you. Great to see you. Do you like doing the video? You said you thought there was something interesting about it. And I've got that dead silent, but there's something about radio, right? Just the talking. It's kind of, I don't know if it's nostalgia, but I don't know, something about it that I really like. We're losing it.
Well, one of the things they say about radio that's fascinating is that you can, as they say, do other things while you're listening to the radio, so that you can multitask or time slice, however you want to call it, that you can't really do with video. And video is very attractive. When you start to listen to people in this venue, you find yourself attracted to the video presentation, which tends to keep you anchored to where you are, and depending on what people have to say, could be a waste of time. There's another interesting phenomenon, though, that as far as I'm concerned, the fastest readers can read in excess of around 1,000 words a minute.
That's
okay.
Wow, that's speed reading. That's amazing.
Yeah, the point that I'm going to run you through is upper limit. Okay, the upper limit of stuff. The average reader reads around 300 words a minute, 250 to 300 words a minute, okay? You and I are talking right now, and if you stop to think about it, the question is how fast can you talk? How many words a minute can you talk?
I think it's about 120, something like that.
On average, in reasonable conversation, a good copy man can push 160. The place I'm going with this is that as the body of information grows, the method we're getting our information from is restricted in the amount we can take in at a given time. Because you can't listen faster. You can listen faster than people talk, because people often on YouTube will jack the speed.
Yeah, they do speed up. I don't like that. I've noticed
Yeah,
that, and I've seen how they do that. Speaking, and I wanted to get this in, and then we will get to debt ceiling. I promise, folks. Also, if you want to join us, we only have a half hour left, but Vernon and I could go on for all day, but we won't. 240-363-7190 if you want to join us. Don't forget, click like, click subscribe. Just noticed, CNN's ratings are just in the tank, but the other news networks aren't doing very well either. Apparently, fewer and fewer people now are getting their news from cable news, and this is a long-term trend. Basically, the Trump administration saved the two, whatever you want to call them, more liberal networks because people, hate watch Trump. But not only are fewer people watching, but there are fewer actual subscribers. That astonished me. People are just cutting the cable left, right, and center. Vernon.
Well, and Gen Z and the millennials never really got into it in the first place. That's why I keep saying it's their world, their battles to fight. I fought a lot of political battles when I was younger locally, for local taxes, a variety of different issues and stuff. And it's not that I don't care. It's the fact that my relevance in the eyes of the majority of the population, which is for the most part are people under 40 now, the old people of Social Security age, of which I am there, we passed that point where they were the majority and they were the driving force.
Well, we're not on TV anymore. I don't see anyone all right, so let's get to this. I keep saying it, we'll do it. And I'm going to sort of make my points. You jump in, Vernon, because that's sort of how we set this up, is that Vernon would comment on what I'm saying and then we'll respond. We're at that debt ceiling just about. Congress is demanding, the Republicans in Congress with Kevin McCarthy leading them, is demanding deep spending cuts, specifically in what some people call entitlements programs, that anti-poverty programs, I think is a better word, one I prefer, but some would call them entitlements. McCarthy wants the Pentagon budget off the table, which is interesting because Carlson was a believer that the Pentagon budget should be on the table. And this is all to allow for the Congress to vote on lifting the debt ceiling. And there are several options which there have been floated for Biden if he doesn't want to go along with the Republican demand, which would be to ignore Congress, say that he has the power under the 14th Amendment, which provides that no one can stand in the way of government debt, federal government debt, and that Congress approved the spending in the past, and therefore they have an obligation. The government does. The federal government has an obligation to pay for the debt. So that's one option, and Biden doesn't want to take that option. Another, and here's how they explain. This is, by the way, is all from the Washington Post, which I feel did an excellent job. I criticize the corporate media a lot, Vernon, but when they do a nice job, I want to give it to them. And I feel like they explained this to me in a pretty good way, although there's a typo or there's a problem with some of the writing in here. But Biden's concerned that if he does just unilaterally ignore Congress and say we're going to spend just the way it's in the budget, and it doesn't matter if we go over that debt limit, which I guess is well over $1 trillion, as you mentioned, the Republicans would immediately challenge it. There would be a crisis where the Treasury bills would skyrocket in price. They would drop, not skyrocket. There'd be less demand for them because the interest would be very low, given the now uncertainty of future payments. You demand a much higher return for the risk you're taking. So the price of the T-bills would drop, which would mean the government would have more trouble paying more debt because it would be getting less for its bills. Federal borrowing costs would spike. Interest rates would rise, obviously, for other loans, and there'd be a broad panic in financial markets. So that's the fear. I'm going to ask you this question. Do you think that's a legitimate fear? In other words, if there was real brinksmanship and Joe Biden said, you know what, I'm going to take this to the courts. I'm going to keep things on a steady playing field. I'm not going to let you guys torpedo what we've got going here. Do you agree that would likely cause some kind of crisis?
My honest opinion is I don't care what we do. I think we're just in trouble anyway. I think the Titanic has hit the iceberg, and this country's going to go through some very hard and bad times. You know, I think that the military budget is a huge distraction. I'll tell you, and the reason being is, and I listen, I am not an economist. I have no training in economy. The only thing I remember about economics is what my
Is you weren't good at it. I don't know. What are you going to say?
I just didn't take any. You know, I if you want to know anything, is my training was in physical chemistry, and you know, as a graduate student, you know, I'll leave that simple mundane stuff to the other people. You know, I'll vote every 4 years in elections, every 2 years, and some of that stuff. But I was really ignorant about politics and stuff. But when people talk about the military budget being 56% of our budget, they're talking about the not the mandatory spending, but
discretionary.
Discretionary, and discretionary is a small portion. The military budget's dropped from about 23% of our budget during the Reagan years to about 15% now. It's about 700 billion out of the 6.5 or 6 trillion we're spending right now. How much are you going to trim it to make a big difference in what we got to spend? You know, billions versus trillions. A trillion is 1,000 billion. And so I always get a kick out of, they will always want to cut the military budget, which is, if people want to do that, that's fine. But the military budget is one of the few things that was actually literally provided for in the original Constitution. They have to really stretch the Constitution thin for most of the discretion for the mandated spending today. And going back to 2006, I think his name was Donald Miller, who was the comptroller for Bill Clinton, was beating the drums that, you know, if we don't get it together, pretty soon we'll be spending everything to pay the interest on the debt, you know, and our entitlements with nothing left over. And the question is when are we going to say this is the final debt ceiling? You can't keep raising your credit limit to meet your bills. At some point, someone's going to cut you off, and that's why I say I don't know. We could very well be there.
Well, I don't think you're wrong, but I think what you're saying is we are in crisis territory. Yeah. When you started talking about the military budget, I just wanted to put this slide up. This is from April of this year by the Pete Peterson Foundation. I believe they're reputable. Our military budget annually is $877 billion, and I think it's probably, I'm not even sure if what we're spending in Ukraine is included in that. It may not be. So we do have an enormous military budget. It's about I think it's 25% of discretionary spending. Maybe it's more than that. That's the minimum. I would like to see.
I think it's pretty high on of the discretionary.
Yeah, spending. Maybe it's even more than 50, that.
I think it's 55, 60%. I have 54% over the years. You know,
I've got that here. I actually do have that one too. Let me see if I can get that one because I anticipated this conversation. I want to see if I can get exactly. Yeah, here we are. So let's get this other slide up here, Vernon, for you and for our viewers. So defense spending accounts for 12% of all Fed spending. And as you said, nearly half of discretionary. So a little less than 56. Maybe it's less now because, as you said, probably as a percentage of the total outlay, it's dropping.
Yeah. But
why not, if you're Biden, I just slash that. Just tell the Republicans, fine, you don't want, we're not going to exceed the budget debt. I'm just going to slash it. It's discretionary. I don't have to spend that money. I'm not going to. I'm going forward, and we're going to cut the military budget to the bone. We're going to stop giving hundreds of millions of dollars worth of missiles and tanks, really now billions of dollars worth of military materiel to Ukraine. And that'll keep us going, at least for a while. And if you don't like it, you know, A, raise the debt ceiling, and B, raise taxes on the wealthy. Now, you may not agree with those proposals. I get it. But wouldn't that be politically astute if you're Joe Biden?
Like I say, I don't think it's going to matter in the long run. I think we're screwed, Hal.
So you don't care about the political short-term ramifications.
No.
So, I mean, I'm not saying you should.
No, Hal, it's a sleight of hand here that keeps the public. And I want to throw. Oh, my brother I get in trouble with my brother because he never follows my analogies. But I want to do it in an analogy to a piece you did on Friday regarding the RFK.
Yes. By the way, thank you for watching. I appreciate that. What did you think? Let me ask you for your.
I think he distracted you both. The question was, is what are you going to do to convince those that are diametrically opposed to your stands on your positions on vaccination to convince us?
Right. And that was Crystal's question.
And he adeptly twisted around
and said, well, what did I say wrong? Right. He answered. I actually did. Go ahead.
And where you went, in my opinion, where you went wrong is you went into all the stuff he was wrong rather than pointing out that he totally distracted and framed the question and now put her on the defensive. The fact of the matter is you got to watch that kind of stuff and you got to be on your toes because all of a sudden you're off in the woods from meaningful conversations that could be had. That was my only issue with you. I agree with everything you said.
So here's my response. If you go back and watch, and I'd have to go back because I may be wrong, but I believe I did call him out. When he did that, I said, here he is answering a question with a question. I didn't spend a lot of time on that. You're right. But I believe I did flag it. So maybe you're right. I should have been more, spend a little more time pointing out how he did the distraction or wiggled out of it. But I thought I pointed that out. But I really did want to also call him out for what I, clearly stating what was contrary to the facts. And I was also so irritated with Bohr because, he just bashed poor Crystal, who couldn't defend herself because she wasn't there. And and this is what frustrates me too, Vernon, is that these personalities, they give their audience red meat and the audiences just respond like wild, animals. They don't use their reasoning. They're like, I'm a door guy, not I'm a truth person. And I find that incredibly upsetting.
And that's
to be honest with you.
A lot of heat.
Yeah, no question. But I can't help that. I just won't. That's what I do. That's who I am. I want to confront people when I think they're wrong. I don't want to give them what they want, but it does hurt with the numbers for sure.
This is the delicate balance with me. Why so many people have a hard time. They put me. They want to put me in conservative, and I lean that way more because I think a lot of the arguments, and whatever argument you want to put up there, I'll deal with you. Is I think that a lot of the conservatives are not very well at articulating what the way they need to articulate to the public, and that's in the realm of emotion. Logic in the realm of emotion can't get much traction, just as emotion in the realm of logic can't get a lot of traction. And so, rather than trying to come to a meeting of the minds, people are kind of always on different pages and taking sides, and it's gotten worse.
I think both sides are totally emotional, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't think it's a realm of one or the other, to be honest.
They're both dismissive of the other arguments. And one of the things that I heard many years ago is if you're going to get into controversial ground, I'm paraphrasing this, it's an interesting thing because if you're not willing to push, you won't get it any place. But if you push too hard, you lose your
You won't get any place either, right?
Either. I know. So how do you do the delicate dance back and forth? You and me on Facebook, our discussion started out that way.
When I'm in your group, I'm far more left wing than I am when I'm with my side. So my side, I don't know. I think we're all on the same side. We all want a better life for most, Americans. I mean, we may dispute how to get there. Certainly you and I do on many issues, but I think we have a vision that isn't that dissimilar.
No, we want a good world for everybody. The argument is how you do that, and I don't think it's I think that we've relied too much on government over the years. And I think the government has a very legitimate place. And one of the conversations you and I had before we set up this show was that regarding socialism versus capitalism and the role of both in the government. And I think it's easy for people to forget that that the United States is united technically only in those issues covered by the Constitution. Other than that, we're similar to the European Union in the respect that each state has a certain autonomy. And in the evolution of the country, as you've heard people say this, it was the family, then the community, then the town, then the counties, then the state. And the last resort was up the line to the federal government. And that's reversed. And I posted something on Facebook one day. I thought I posted, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. What kind of crazy talk is that? Because that's Jack Kennedy in the 60s. And now everybody's, what can you do for me? What can you do for me, federal government? What can you do for me? And you have to be able to produce what you give out. And that's one of my brother's big complaints is we're a lot of people taking and not as many people producing. We're really expecting the federal. So we're kind of
I think that kind of talk I find is very problematic, Vernon, because say a lot of people are taking, few are producing. I mean, we have like 4% unemployment. Those people are all working, are producing. Do you think the person at McDonald's who's making a burger for $12 an hour, if they're lucky, you don't think they're producing? They're producing. And a lot of the people who are taking maybe this is a
oversimplified
a language dispute, because I would say many of the people who are, quote, making the most are the ones who are taking the most and producing the least.
Yeah, we could have that discussion another time. People want to oversimplify complex problems.
Well, I agree to a degree, but sometimes problems are relatively simple, I think. So let's just get into this. So basically right now, the government is spending 25 cents on every dollar more. And then I want to move on, but let's just thrash this out finally. Basically, we are way overspending. 25 cents on every dollar. For every dollar we spend, we're taking in 75 cents. I think I did that right. No, for every $1.25 we spend, I don't know what cut by about 25%. That means for every dollar we spend, we're taking in 75%, because 25% of a dollar is a quarter. We take that quarter away. Every dollar we spend, we're taking in 75 cents. I would, if I were Biden, call the Republican bluff. If it's a bluff, maybe it's not, and say I'm going to cut but I already provided. I just want to reiterate. I would not negotiate. And he will negotiate. And an article in Common Dream says that the Republicans have routinely gotten over on Biden, and I think that's probably true. I think it's because he doesn't mind getting gotten over, because he doesn't really believe in the progressive goals that, for example, I have. So that would be my quick answer. Do you have a response? I'll let you respond, and then I want to get to one more story.
What do you think we should do?
Well, about the debt, I think he should cut spending right now, but he should cut spending in areas where I don't think we should be spending money, which on military aid to Ukraine. I think the Ukraine war has been a disaster for Ukraine and for us. I think you may agree with me on that one.
Yeah. Our budget, you ever go to usdebtclock.org?
No. But I know there's a number that keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Right now the official budget deficit is almost 1.5 trillion. The actual budget deficit is closer to 1.6 trillion. That's 100 billion. Okay. That's huge. And you've got a military budget that's what, 90, let's see what it
Close
is.
to 900 billion.
Huh?
And 900 billion. I got the numbers wrong yesterday, by the way. Totally wrong. I added 3 zeros. You know, I get confused because we spend so much money that I somehow rounded millions into billions. And I got called out by it by one of my more conservative listeners. So, Jeff, good catch. Actually, Shade beat you to that. I had already corrected it in the description, but I appreciate it when listeners are listening that closely to get it wrong. I think we would be able to, because what I understand we would have to do is cut a quarter out of every dollar we spend. We can't see what it says outlays. If we also, I would cut the interest payments, right? Why pay all that interest to the treasury bonds if we can't pay our debts? I think the creditors should get stiffed before, the lenders should be stiffed before the providers, the purveyors of goods and services. So I'd cut the investor payments. That's what I would do.
Sure. Well, how many people, how many of us are invested in,
Treasury
the
bills.
average working guy invested in those bonds?
Not that many.
Okay.
I mean, it's not good. It's not great. People have treasury bill funds, right? So it would reduce the value.
Yeah. If you took the entire defense budget, okay, cut it 100% and put it toward the budget deficit, you just still be growing the budget deficit at 700 billion per year.
I think the point though is that we just have to cut our spending by 25 cents and $1, and we would be able to do that through cutting the Pentagon and through paying off, not paying the Treasury interest, or at least not paying it fully. But even if not, we would get us awfully close to it, awfully close to that.
To cutting the budget deficit?
To being able to continue not to cutting the deficit, but being able to continue to fund the government. Because we don't have to cut the debt completely. We just have to stop spending more than we're taking in. As long as the debt doesn't grow above a certain level, then the government can continue.
Keep it under the debt ceiling.
Yeah.
Okay. Doesn't,
No, it doesn't solve the problem. It kicks it. Well, we wouldn't be going to greater debt. We would just be keeping the debt the way it is. All right, real quick. I think we can agree on this. I always make this mistake, by the way. Let me go to no slides for 1 sec, Vernon. So I think we can agree. I don't think we both are concerned about big government and its power to do harm. So I just wanted to get to this story. This really caught my eye in the Baltimore Sun. Prosecutors seek to back out of deal. This is involving a guy who was charged with and convicted of murder back about 20 years ago. You can see this in Baltimore, which is a very high crime city, unfortunately, very scary. I don't know if you can read that. I hope you can. But basically, he had a deal with the prior DA who was voted out, that they were going to let him go on time served based on new information. They struck a deal. And a hard law and order DA was voted in to replace the more lenient, or whatever term you want to use. And I think that's because crime is very high, and people are angry, obviously, at liberals who they believe are, I guess, coddling criminals or not providing a serious enough penalty. And that's fine. I think there are times when they're right. But if there's prosecutorial misconduct, or if it's not clear someone's guilty, and we've seen this in many situations in California and across the country, that's obviously, I would assume you agree, a very different kettle of fish.
Yeah, well, just off the top of my head is if they cut a deal, you don't change it.
Well, and I agree with that in general, although I think I
think you set a precedent is the problem. Is then why should anyone believe any deals that any prosecutors cut in the future?
Yeah, what really bothered me about this is I understand you get a new, right. First of all, that's right. Why would anyone agree with a cut a deal? Although what the prosecutor is saying is, well, we didn't really cut a deal. We just told the guy we'd let him go. So we're not really cutting a deal. It's not like he gave us, it's not like he turned state's evidence, right? And then he didn't act to his detriment. There's no, we didn't make a promise that he relied on to his detriment. What the prosecutor said.
So they lied to him?
Well, it's a different prosecutor, right? It's a different DA. But the new DA says the state has reviewed relevant records and determined that the strength of inculpating evidence outweighs the exculpating evidence as presented. Okay, I get it. Now they're saying, well, we think he's guilty. Here's the problem I have with this. They don't know if he's guilty. They don't have any, like there's no eyewitnesses, there's no forensic evidence. If there was, I might feel differently. So we don't know. He was convicted on circumstantial evidence, which is often very strong, and that's fine. Yeah. And you can convict someone on circumstantial evidence. But if you're going to tell a guy, we're going to let you go, and here's the reason. Our evidence was circumstantial. You were 17 when you were convicted. The basis of the conviction was you said some things that other witnesses said were different from what other witnesses said. Not that they saw you, not that there was a gun with fingerprints, nothing like that. Just that your statements didn't jibe with what other witnesses said. And then we did some things that we shouldn't have done. We did some things we shouldn't have done in prosecution. And that's what troubles me the most about this, Vernon, this case, is that it came out that the prosecutor did not divulge. There's, and I'm a lawyer, so as you said, I'm a trained attorney, although I haven't done it in a long time. But Brady evidence, you may be familiar with this because you're very bright and very knowledgeable. Brady evidence is evidence that the prosecutor adduces, that the prosecutor finds, that tends to exculpate, tends to suggest that the defendant is not guilty, rather than tends to say the defendant is guilty. And under the Brady Supreme Court decision, prosecutors have a duty to divulge Brady evidence.
Yes.
And in this case, they've already found they didn't do it. For example, the detectives, the homicide detectives, found a witness who said that they'd heard two other witnesses saying they knew that there were people who had talked about the murder. They were talking about killing him beforehand, the victim. It wasn't the defendant. Two other individuals were overheard discussing murdering the defendant. No, the victim. And then those two were seen by yet another witness in the victim's backyard. Well, that's clearly exculpatory, right? Because it strongly suggests that there were two other individuals who might well have committed the murder. That's exculpatory, right? If you can say, well, it wasn't me, it was him.
Yeah,
that's defense. And the court said to the prosecutor, why didn't you turn it over? You should have turned it over. But since it wasn't necessarily admissible, right? It was hearsay. We don't know who those people were. Maybe. Therefore, you weren't it's not grounds for reversal. We don't have to reverse the conviction. I don't know. That may be technically true, but still, they should have given it to the defense attorney.
Absolutely.
And they didn't. And then the other point is now they found there was another informant. The victim had been possibly involved in another shooting, which the defendant, the convict, wasn't part of. So he was already involved with some badasses.
Yeah.
Not the criminal, not the convict. So again, maybe all of that wouldn't necessarily be grounds for a retrial or for dismissal of charges. But if the previous prosecutor looked at all that and said, I'm going to let you go. You spent 20 years in jail. I think you might not have done it. I've a huge problem with some newbie coming in and saying, nah, you're screwed. You're not going anywhere.
Yeah, the newbie doesn't change, in my opinion, the overarching responsibility of the office. You have people come and go that step into the positions of the office, but the office, they're merely representing in time that office. And if that office, in fact, made that decision, that needs to hold. Otherwise, you start to really undermine the justice system, in my opinion, because, as I said, is then why should anyone ever trust anything that they're promised? Because, we don't know what you're going to do down the line. You're here, you're in exchange for this, you're promising me this, but the next guy comes along, he might change his mind. I have no guarantee. And I think that, listen, whether someone likes my politics or not, I think that you'd find that I'm pretty amenable to logical arguments. I think that, I would rather let him out and have it be a mistake, and if something happens, retry him, than undermine the system which we're part of. And I think we see a lot of that going on today because people want it their way, and whether it be in terms of what we just went through with COVID, everyone wants to do it their way. And there is the individual like you and me, and we have certain feelings, but we also operate as a collective. And part of the social agreement is in those areas that the collective decides the rules. We abide by the rules determined by the collective unless we decide to change them as a collective. And I think we've gotten to a point in this society where it will become unworkable when people say, well, just screw that, that's wrong. I'm not going to do it. And I understand that we are autonomous beings too, but by default, we are part of a collective society, and to the extent that we undermine its collective nature, we're in trouble, I think.
Well, I think that's a very, intelligent analysis, and it's certainly a one that it's a legally important analysis, right? Is that an institution should abide by decisions of former members of that institution who had the power to make such a decision, because again, then we're not keeping our word. But I honestly, Vernon, I wanted to also bring this story to your attention because I assume that you, as a more conservative individual, and maybe you do, I'm not saying you don't, would also view this as a concerning example of government overreach, of the government using its power against an individual, first of all, to prosecute him without following the rules that are sensible rules, right? That make sense, because prosecutors get tunnel vision and they want to get a notch on their belt and they want to convict somebody, and they don't give exculpatory evidence to the defendant so they can have a fair trial. I think we agree that that's important part of our jurisprudential history, and that in this case, there's more than sufficient reason to look at that conviction and say the government brought its full weight and power down on somebody unfairly.
I 100% agree with that, and especially those are the kinds of things we as a people need to start paying attention to, because it really is supposed to be a government of, for, and by the people. And one of the things that I've come to really believe is being a good citizen means being involved in your government, of which that represents you, more than once a year, every 2 years, or whatever. And you can't have a government of, for, and by the people where the public doesn't participate in that and then blames the government as representative of them. I think that what you just described is atrocious. They set up rules of court. I'm not an attorney. The legal system set up in a way that, although it's not perfect necessarily, is that at least everyone kind of has it on a level playing field as they go into the battle. And I understand. By the way, to that extent, I would say that anyone that's faced with a death penalty case that's being charged with a capital punishment, that the public should fund them to the extent that OJ was funded with his attorneys to defend that defendant, because what's at stake? You should have, if you are charged with a capital crime, which involves the death penalty, it's incumbent upon we, the people, to provide you with the best possible defense, because what's at stake is your life, not a public defender. I'm a strong believer in that, because that's nonsense that someone could get off because they have the money and someone else is going to get cooked because they don't.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of miscarriages. I would say the original OJ verdict was obviously a miscarriage as well. I mean, he was guilty, right? And he went free. And it looks like this poor, well, he was a boy, 17, teenager.
Yeah.
Likely. I mean, we don't know. And I am relating to you just what was in the Baltimore Sun. I don't know anything personally about it. It's a reputable newspaper. They have good reporters. I have no reason to doubt that they're reporting it straight. But if they got stuff wrong, then clearly I did too. Hey, Vernon, I'm going to let you go at this point. I want to thank you so much. I really appreciate, what a great, just great to have Vernon on. And I'm smiling because I enjoyed this so much. He's talking. You can't hear him because I shut off his mic. I've always wanted to do that. I finally got to do it. Everyone have a great afternoon or morning or whatever, wherever you are. I'll be back tomorrow with the thought wrestler, Danny Cardwell.